last 20 years, an increasing percentage of our people have come to depend on industry for their livelihood, so that today the wage workers in industry rank in importance side by side with the tillers of the soil. As a people, we cannot afford to let any group of citizens or any individual citizen live or labor under conditions which are injurious to the common welfare. Industry, therefore, must submit to such public regulation as will make it a means of life and health, not of death or inefficiency. We must protect the crushable elements at the base of our present industrial structure. We stand for a living wage. Wages are subnormal if they fail to provide a living for those who devote their time and energy to industrial occupation. The monetary equivalent of a living wage varies according to local conditions, but must include enough to secure the elements of a normal standard of living, a standard high enough to make morality possible, to provide for education and recreation, to care for immature members of the family, to maintain the family during periods of sickness, and to permit of reasonable saving for old age. Hours are excessive if they fail to afford the worker sufficient time to recuperate and return to his work thoroughly refreshed. We hold the night work of labor and women, that the night labor of women and children is abnormal and should be prohibited. We hold that the employment of women over 48 hours per week is abnormal and should be prohibited. We hold that the 7-day working week is abnormal and hold that 1 day of rest in 7 should be provided by law. We hold that the continuous industries operating 24 hours out of 24 are abnormal, where because of public necessity or for technical reasons, such as molten metal, the 24 hours must be divided into 2 shifts of 12 hours or 3 shifts of 8. They should, by law, be divided into 3 of 8.
Here is a cartoon from the time that is making fun of Roosevelt's approach, basically saying that in his speeches he throws together a little bit of everything. The more you mix in, the easier to satisfy everybody, it says. So he's throwing in a little bit of progressivism. He's throwing in democratic stuff, conservative viewpoints, various different things, and putting them all into his speech, trying to appeal to a broad variety of people. In reality, Roosevelt's approach was definitely not the same as either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It was somewhere in the middle. In some ways, it was parts of both. He called, during the 1912 campaign, for what he referred to as a new nationalism that required a strong government to regulate industry, protect the middle and working class, and carry on great national projects. Almost sounds like another Roosevelt that we'll be discussing later. On the other hand, and on the other side, the Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson called for what he described as new freedom. Wilson opposed monopolies. He was a progressive, but he was not as devoted to that, as sort of over the top about that as Roosevelt was. He called for much less severe regulations. He called for the protection of free enterprise that he felt Roosevelt was going overboard in stifling. Wilson said, quote, "If America is not to have free enterprise, he can have freedom of no sort whatever." He believed that small business must be protected. And essentially, Wilson distrusted big business, but he also distrusted big government. He didn't trust either of them. And he didn't like to see big government, involved with big business. Not because big business should be protected, but because he felt that big business, the corporations, were so corrupt that if the more the government gets involved with them, the more the government is going to be corrupted by them. Well, here are the results of the election. Sitting President Taft came in a distant third. Roosevelt did fairly well, but Wilson decisively took the victory. So now there's going to be a Democrat in the White House, Woodrow Wilson. As he was preparing to be sworn in, a couple of constitutional amendments were ratified. The 16th Amendment, which was the establishment of a graduated income tax that we talked about before, and the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. The 16th Amendment was signed off on by the outgoing Secretary of State. The 17th was signed by the incoming new Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, whom Wilson appointed to that post. So after, 16 years of trying to become president, Bryan eventually at least got a job, Secretary of State.